Hello everybody and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about Greece Unveiled, and we're going to be looking into the classical period of Greece and pulling at a few historical strings to see if anything shakes loose. Now we're going to come back to this, but before we do, I want to just to hit on this whole notion of a fabricated history. If indeed our history has been manipulated, how might you do that? How might you reintroduce this version of Greece and Rome that has been given to us? How might you go about introducing another version of that? Well, I think a good place to look might be at the rediscovery of a lot of these ancient texts that primarily happened in the 13 and 1400s. As mentioned here in this particular article, the next main cause of the Renaissance was the rediscovery by European thinkers of these ancient Greek and Roman texts. So if indeed you were going to reintroduce a new history as far as classical Roman Greece is concerned, how could you do that? Well, you could manufacture that history and then rediscover those texts which you've created, potentially. And this is just a chart just showing where some of these classical texts were found. A lot of them were found in abbeys and these different locations, largely in the 1400s. But again, were they planted or were they just honestly rediscovered? That is the question. Now, once you had these texts and a lot of this history was rediscovered, you have to create this timeline and the chronology. And that's where Joseph Scaliger comes into play, and he's referred to as being one of the founders of the science of chronology. He goes through a lot of these texts and these historians that are mentioned, and he pulls all these threads together and he creates this timeline. So now you got the texts, you got the timeline. Now what also happens largely in the 16 and 1700s, you have the introduction of these academies of art. And I believe the first one was actually opened in the mid to late 1500s in Florence, Italy, but they're termed usually imperial academies of art or royal academies of art. And they pretty much have a monopoly on the type of art that is being produced, largely in the 16 and 1700s. And this art focuses on this period of time, this classical period of time of Greece and Rome. So you go from these texts that get rediscovered, you get this timeline that's put together, and now you start having these paintings and sculptures that are being produced that reinforce all of these historical scenes and characters. So just really interesting. And I think this is just a photo of the Russian Academy of Arts in St. Petersburg. But as this is just talking about, these academies for painting were established across Europe during the 1700s, although they first arose in Italy in the 1500s. And I think there is a Royal Academy of Arts that was founded in London in 1768 as well. So I think these are a key piece to this introduction and reinforcement of our new history. Okay, let's get back to the Acropolis of Athens. Now, I first really started looking into the Acropolis maybe about a year ago, and it was when I came across this concept of Persian rubble, which just refers to the bulk of architectural and votive sculptures that were damaged by the invading Persian armies led by Xerxes I during the destruction of Athens, which happened during the second Persian invasion of Greece, according to the narrative. Now, what's interesting about all that is that we're told at some point after the sack of the Acropolis that the Greeks, they took the damaged sculptural rubble, including the Critias boy and other sculptures, and they buried them in pits underneath the surface of the religious complex. So I think it was in 1866 or thereabouts that they rediscovered these sculptures. And I just remember thinking, I wonder if they were planted there. Again, I don't know, but it got me thinking along those lines. But that's kind of as far as I went. But then I saw a couple of videos which talk about some of the structures that were actually on the Acropolis. And I'm going to share some of that information with you guys because I think it has merit. And I'll leave a link to one of those videos. But let's start by talking about this photograph from 1893. And what I really want to focus in on is this temple, which is called the Temple of Athena Nike. And we are told that that temple was rebuilt in 1834. But in this particular photograph, there's nothing immediately behind it, at least from this vantage point, which is going to come into play here shortly. Now, if you start looking at other photographs and even paintings, this is a painting from 1877. You see this temple again, and there doesn't appear to be any other structure immediately next to it. Now, when you get to some of these older photographs, this is from 1865, you see this tower, which is right next to that temple of Athena Nike. So this tower is referred to as a Frankish tower, and we are told that this particular tower was built on the Acropolis by the Franks as part of the palace of the Dukes of Athens. So it was part of a palace. And I think the date they say this was constructed, they don't know the exact date, but they give a range. And I think it's like late 1300s all the way to 1450 or thereabouts. So they say it was part of a palace. Okay, fair enough. So why do we care? Well, we're getting to that. We're told that this particular tower was demolished by Greek authorities in 1874. Now, before I get to sort of the crux of it all, I started looking into these towers a little bit, some of these Frankish towers of central Greece, because there's quite a few of them, and I came across some interesting articles. One was just talking about how you have a lot of these freestanding towers of presumed medieval date, how they're a feature of central Greece, but how that the towers have been virtually unstudied, either individually or as a group. Okay. And then I came across another paper talking about these medieval towers of Greece, a problem in chronology and function. So there's questions about the function of these towers and when they were actually built. So right off the bat, I'm interested in these towers, but this particular photo I think really got me hooked. And it's a photo from 1870, and it shows this Frankish tower, right next to this temple of Athena Nike. Now, we're told that this temple was built, 420 BC. And again, this Frankish tower, we're told, was built sometime in like the either 1300s or 1400s. But when you start looking at this tower and these blocks, and then you start kind of looking at this base right here, they seem to be almost of the same construction. And you kind of start looking even at this temple, and it almost seems like at one point these might have been one construction, but this temple, even if you disregard that, this temple is sitting on top of what appears to be this structure. But this is, we're told, is from 420 BC, and this was built much later, we're told. Now, you could push back against that, but I find that pretty intriguing. But that's just the beginning, really. Now, when you start looking at the Acropolis as a whole, what was shared was that if you take a look at this part of the Acropolis and all of these arches here, they look eerily similar to kilns in relation to mining. In this particular example, also shows a tower. Now, just because something looks like something, that doesn't mean it's the case, but this isn't uncommon to have, at least during previous periods of history, to have kilns all in a row like this. And there are several examples of that. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, that is intriguing. But then what also was pointed out was these heaps that are on the Acropolis. Now, there's another aspect of mining that has a very similar look to that as well, and that is these spoil tips, which are basically just waste material removed during mining. So we've got potentially kilns, we've got evidence potentially of spoil tips, and you've got an interesting tower, which people are questioning the function of it. And I think that's very interesting. And what I'd like to add to all this, on the Acropolis of Athens, there is this theater, this Odeon of Herodes Atticus. Okay, interesting, but what's that got to do with mining? And here's just an older photo of it. Now, there's some questions about when this actually might have been built, but putting all that aside, I want to touch upon another aspect that you will find around mines, obviously, in mining is quarries, right? And this stepped nature of the quarries. And a lot of times you will find quarries very close to the kilns, which makes sense. So where am I going with all this? Not much more than 20 miles away from the Acropolis of Athens, there's another Acropolis, and it's an archaeological site of Thorikos. And what's interesting about this place is that it also has one of these theaters, and I believe it's like the oldest theater according to the official narrative. And what is an acropolis, by the way, just in case maybe you weren't aware? The term acropolis just means high city in Greek and can refer to one of the many natural strongholds constructed on rocky, elevated ground in Greece. And of course, the Acropolis of Athens is the best known example. But this particular site that we're talking about, they have a theater as well. And when I was looking into this theater, it is surrounded by mining-related activity. And there is, I believe recently they discovered silver mines. Newly discovered Greek silver mine rewrites history. So all throughout this hill, there's these silver mines. And I believe, here's the theater here, if you can see my mouse. You have this hill in the background, the theater in the middle, and you have this, what's called an ore washery. So it's related to mining activity. And then you come across some more information just talking about how the area around Thorikos Theater was a mining center. Okay, so what's that got to do with the theater? The theater itself was erected on the surface of an earlier marble and limestone quarry between two long-lived mines. So this theater was built on a quarry, and it's surrounded by mining activity, silver mines, these ore washeries, and it has towers as well. They found several towers on this particular site. So when you get back to the Acropolis of Athens, is it a far stretch to think that this might have been an area where there was a quarry, as well as we saw the photos of what might be these spoil tips and also what might be these kilns? I think there's a very strong case to be made along those lines. But I just kind of wanted to share that with you because it just seems like it has a lot to do with mining. And I think these theaters might have been refashioned at a later date. In this particular case, this Thorikos, this theater, they basically tell you that's what happened. Now, when did that happen? Anybody's guess. But there's a lot of evidence pointing to we're looking at just mining activity that's been repurposed. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Now, I think I'll leave it here for today, but I just wanted to recap basically that I think we're looking at a deception that's centuries in the making. And this false history, I think, starts with the rediscovery of these ancient texts. And I think it moves forward into the chronology, the new timeline, then the academies of art putting out these painting sculptures that reinforce that history. And then the finding of places like Pompeii and Herculaneum, and then the Persian rubble, maybe that was planted, and then taking what might have been a mining site, the Acropolis at Athens, and just giving it a new history, basically, and remodeling and redesigning it. I think that is what we might be looking at. So intriguing stuff. And I just wanted to also give a shout out once again to my patrons. Your support, as always, is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. So I think that's it for today. So until next time, take care. Bye.